Hi guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called The Immoral Ducal Family Needs to Learn Family Values. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! In front of her is a depraved person who kills his own family, asking how she wants to be saved from her miserable life. Her only request is to spare Lord Cedric and Lady Cecilia. She never thought it'd come to this when it all began a month ago. Margaret arrived at House Bertha for a governess position. As the knight escorts her, the memories of her past life resurface. She was a teacher with more than 30 students, but on her way to work, she died instantly, hit by a truck. At the butler's office, she meets Javier, who praises her excellent resume and invites her to meet the children. As they walk, he tells her she'll be looking after Lord Cedric and Lady Cecilia. He shares Cecilia's struggles with speaking, while Cedric is clever but mischievous, though nothing compared to Lord Diego. Lastly, he warns her not to let them run into Lord Diego no matter what. He assures her he's polite, but there are always unavoidable circumstances, leaving Margaret confused. As they walk, she finds his name familiar. He mentions that Diego and the children have different mothers, and it clicks. They're characters from the novel she read in her previous life, Contractual Marriage to a Dangerous Duke. In the novel, Dolores, the Duke's first wife and Diego's biological mother, was treated poorly for her looks and later died of heartbreak. The Duke later fell for his second wife, Anna, a tactful woman and mother to the children. The Duke wanted Cedric to be his successor and tried to assassinate Diego. The butler introduces Margaret to the children. She remembers she's also part of the novel as Estella Margaret Montiel, who'll soon meet her death by protecting her students. No wonder she pleaded with him to spare the children. A month later, as Margaret heads to the study room, Miss Gale calls her over for a chat and offers her some apricots. They chat about Margaret's passion in teaching and how she's surviving the manor. Her past life's memories help her survive as a tutor. She enters the study room and is greeted by Cedric, demanding apricots. Last time, Cedric spat out the strawberries she gave him. He hates fruits. He snatches an apricot and chokes on the seed. Margaret quickly saves him, then brings the basket to Cecilia, who takes a bite and smiles. During her stay at the manor, Margaret learns 3 things. Staying with the children helps her avoid Diego, the kids listen well to her, and she must be cautious around Duchess Anna. Cedric takes a seat, and just as Margaret is about to begin teaching, Duchess Anna enters the room. Margaret greets the Duchess, but her attention is on Cecilia. She glares at Cecilia, questioning why she attends class with Cedric, then asks about her math lessons and turns to Margaret, asking why Cecilia's progress is slow. Margaret explains Cecilia learns at a different pace, but the Duchess takes it the wrong way. Is she calling her child a half-wit? Suddenly, Cedric agrees. Cecilia can't even talk properly yet. He shifts the topic to his own progress, boasting he's finished learning the history of the Mesquite Kingdom. Cedric is such a good brother despite agreeing. The Duchess leaves, pleased with Cedric's progress. Margaret calls him out for lying about his progress, but he argues he saved them from his witch of a mother. She gives him a piggyback ride as promised for finishing his lesson, and they walk through the halls. Suddenly, they bump into Diego Bertha. He gives them a stern expression. They greet each other, but the children cling tightly to Margaret. He shares about their mother's boast about Cedric's progress. Margaret backs the lie, claiming Cedric finished reading the Mesquite Kingdom lineage, though Cedric feels guilty. He points out Cedric ignoring him, and Cedric quickly apologizes. He demands Margaret to teach him proper etiquette, something their parents should be doing. Margaret silently agrees, but knows he shouldn't say that in front of the children. She sets them down and sends them to the training hall. They obey. Margaret faces Diego, saying adult matters should stay between adults, not in front of the children. She quickly defends Cedric, insisting he wasn't ignoring him. Is she gonna get fired for speaking up? He smirks and asks for her name, Estella Margaret Montiel. He shares the Duchess's plan to hold a special dinner for Cedric's brilliance, but is constantly postponed because of his father's busy schedule. This leaves Margaret confused. If he helps his father with his task, the special dinner will be held. Suddenly, he smiles brightly, eager to hear Cedric recite the Mesquite Kingdom's lineage. He expects her to attend. After all, she is his teacher. She's left frozen. Their lie backfired. Cedric now has to memorize up to page 500, and if he's humiliated, she will surely lose her job. In a flash, she rushes to the children and tells them they're pulling an all-nighter. They stay up all night memorizing the book until they pass out. The next day, Cedric must read the summary while he's getting dressed. They both utilized their time and took responsibility for their lie. All that's left is the special dinner. Cedric is getting information overload. I would have died studying all night during my exams. They enter the dining room anxiously. Diego points out Margaret's tired expression. She insists she slept well. He smirks, noting the study's light was on all night. Tension fills the air between them, but the Duke interrupts, praising Margaret. The Duke and Duchess aren't that keen on checking Cedric's progress, unlike Diego. The Duke begins questioning him. He first asks how Regent Teriosa handled the immigrants during the Great Famine. This is from the summary. Cedric answers him confidently, saying the immigrants became slaves after resorting to illegal means due to poverty. They praise him for his intelligence. Diego asks him to explain why the royal family advocated for the abolition of slavery. Margaret notices Cedric struggling to remember, but he answers. The slaves' resentment grew louder, and the royal family couldn't ignore it. Lastly, Diego asks which king wished to reform the slavery system. It was Bronte II. Proud, Margaret and their parents praise Cedric. A mnemonic device helped him memorize the king's names. Cedric is proof that Margaret is truly a good teacher. Diego remarks on his diligence in his studies, and Cedric says he looks up to him, shocking everyone in the room. The Duke is pleased to see his sons in good terms. He promises Margaret a check as a reward and asks to meet him in his office after dinner. After dinner, she plans her escape with the children while waiting for the Duke. He'll be dead soon. She won't have a chance to make a deal with Diego. She heads to the library and is surprised to find Diego there. He explains he's reading a book before bed, then quickly asks why she's in the library. The check. Nervous, she attempts to leave. She can't be alone with a murderer-to-be. He approaches her, wondering what magic she cast on Cedric to become so smart overnight. Cedric is never diligent with his studies, but Margaret defends him. There was no magic. He studied the whole book. He corners her against a bookshelf. Why is he coming closer? They can have a conversation 5 steps apart. He agrees, but he can't see her eyes behind her ridiculously thick glasses. Doesn't he know it's a fashion piece for a governess? She clenches her fists and asks why he isn't happy that Cedric enjoys studying. After all, they're a family. He scoffs. He doesn't see his siblings as real family. Margaret wonders how he could be so evil he'd kill innocent children. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by fragmented voices from the Duke's office across the library. Knowing what the conversation is about, Margaret covers Diego's ears. The voices became loud and clear. They're planning to assassinate Diego. He removes her hands and tells her to forget whatever she heard. She asks if he's okay. Why wouldn't he be? The Duke is so evil. Did he forget Diego is his biological son too? Before leaving, he threatens her. If she uses what she heard to her advantage, she'll die. Lastly, he advises her to find another job. Margaret finally understands. He kills because he had to survive. The next day, Cedric confronts Margaret for smelling like alcohol. She was so disturbed last night she ended up drinking. The Duke's death is fast approaching. She needs to come up with a plan. Margaret nervously knocks on Diego's office. Now's her chance. She enters and sees Diego buttoning his shirt. He asks the butler to leave the documents, but she corrects him. She's Margaret. She came to ask for a favor. She makes small talk about the weather, but he glares at her. He knows exactly what she's going to say. She's trying to covet the position of his wife just because she discovered his weakness that night in the library. He interrupts her. Their sentences overlap, saying she's got the wrong idea while she invites him to a picnic. Confusion and awkwardness fills the air. He asks why she's inviting him, and she admits she kept listening to the conversation in the library. He reminds her his threat, but she counters with a deal. She explains Duke Bertha has someone working with House Beautry, his mother's family. They've been supporting Diego so that Duke Bertha wouldn't change his successor of his own accord. Not to mention, they have a strong trust for one another, making it hard for Diego to uncover the spy. He asks what she wants. She wants him to play with the children. He reluctantly agrees. During the picnic, the children feel nervous having Diego around. He assumed it was an outdoor class, but Margaret explains they're there to appreciate nature. She opens the book about plants they're going to learn, but Cedric doesn't see the point. So she turns the lesson into a game. They must find the flowers from the book. The winner gets to choose their prize, either a snack or class exemption card. Diego can't believe she's offering an exemption class in front of her employer. That's very bold of Margaret. She's indeed unique. She turns to Diego, expecting him to participate. Is she trying to get back at him for testing Cedric? He has no choice but to get up. Cecilia crouches on a bush picking a flower when suddenly a big shadow looms behind her. Cecilia looks back, only to see Diego grinning like a wolf. He points out the flower she picked and asks to see. Scared, she firmly refuses. He offers a deal. If she gives him her flowers, he'll give her something better than Margaret's prize. Cecilia gives her flowers, but Cedric is shocked. How could Diego cheat like this? He always follows rules and shows consideration around others. He calls for Margaret to tattletale, but Diego quickly covers his mouth, silencing him. Not long, Margaret arrives at the scene. Caught red-handed, he lets Cedric go. Margaret is disappointed in Diego for threatening the children. Worried about Diego being scolded, Cecilia grabs his clothes, makes him kneel, and gives him her flowers. He takes them and offers them to Margaret, apologizing. She didn't say he had to pick flowers himself. Everyone is stunned. The scene feels like something out of a fairy tale. Cecilia teases Diego that he likes Margaret, leaving her flustered. Aw, that is so cute! Will there be chemistry between Margaret and Diego soon? On the picnic cloth, Margaret asks Diego how he got Cecilia to defend him enthusiastically. She should know, after all, she's the teacher. He shifts the topic to the traitor, the Viscount Franzel Beautry, his uncle. He thinks Diego is aiming to be the next Marquess. Viscount Franzel's health is declining with no successor since his eldest son passed away. He believes Diego has a better chance at the title than his second son. Diego isn't surprised. His eldest uncle received the title, but his grandfather loved his mother most. There wasn't much description about Diego's mother back in the novel other than her looks. She asks him what his mother was like. With a soft look, he says she was a very wise woman. She stares at him, and he notices. She changes the topic to symbolic flowers. The one she's holding means family peace. He tries to throw the flower, but she notices his wound on his wrist. Why is she surprised? There was an assassin last night. He knew in advance, so he wasn't seriously injured. In the novel, Diego was pure evil, but in reality, he's too complex to describe. Suddenly, the children approach Margaret, sleepy. They lie down on her lap and drift to sleep. Diego notices how they can sleep in broad daylight and lightly pokes Cecilia's arm. Margaret can't help but smile at how peaceful the picnic was and asks if they can do it again sometime. Diego refuses and leaves. As he walks back to the manor, he's lost in thought. She's not trying to become his partner, but she's pitying him. Oh, Diego and the children actually look so good when they get along. I wish he would spare them. Margaret believes families should be loving and harmonious and love one another, but Diego disagrees. She's bound to become an obstacle in his plan to remove the children from the manor. He'll have no choice but to kill her. He remembers she's from the north and plans to send her back to her hometown while he executes his plan. He stares at his hand, remembering how she held it. There's no reason why he should show her any consideration. The next day, Cedric happily walks through the halls. It's the holy celebration, which means everyone is out of the manor. It's his day off. He can't help but feel happy about Cecilia's progress in speaking, and he's grown closer to Diego. He opens the door, surprised to see his mother. She orders Cedric to come closer. She has something to say to him. He thought she would be out celebrating. Why is she here? She assumes Margaret and Cecilia are in their rooms, since she told Margaret to start class late today. She remarks Cedric's excellence in answering the questions at his special dinner. However, he doesn't feel deserving of her compliment. She assures him he'll be the successor, and the minor problem in their plan will quickly be resolved. She reminds him not to compliment Diego, especially with his father around. He hates him. Cedric argues that he has no interest in succeeding the title. He knows Diego is much better than him in any aspect, and he's the eldest son in the family. How could he take his rightful position? Afraid, he imagines Margaret's comfort. If she's there, she would comfort him with her words. The Duchess warns Cedric that once she and the Duke pass away, Diego will show him no mercy. He argues back, telling her that he and Diego have gotten closer and he doesn't hate them. He accidentally admits they went on a picnic with him, filling the Duchess with rage in her eyes. Oh no, I think they're supposed to keep their picnic a secret. Later that day, Margaret visits Miss Gale in the kitchen. She offers Margaret a meal and she expresses her gratitude. As she eats, she asks Miss Gale about the late Duchess. She warns Margaret to be careful. It's forbidden to talk about her. Miss Gale describes her as noble and dignified. She had profound knowledge and talent in art, making the manor like an art gallery. However, everything she created was removed. She never expected her to pass away from an infectious disease. As soon as she did, the current Duchess came to live in the manor. She stops herself. She's talking too much. Margaret notices Miss Gale is the only person working and asks where the other staff are. Miss Gale tells her it's the holy celebration. His and her Grace is out in the temple to pray. She remembers the Mesquite Kingdom's an agricultural nation, so they hold the holy celebration during spring. She tries to remember what season the Duke's death will happen, but suddenly a maid calls out for her in a panic. The Duchess wants to see Margaret. Cedric is filled with guilt while the Duchess is filled with rage. How is she meant to make sense of that situation? Margaret asks for forgiveness, unsure of what she means. The Duchess remarks on her skill at feigning ignorance and fooling others with that docile face of hers. Margaret asks what she means, saying she's willing to explain whatever the matter is. The Duchess comes closer and tells her about the children's picnic with Diego. She found out. She clenches her fists. Margaret explained to keep their picnic a secret, but she overlooked that the children are still young. It's no surprise she found out. She tries to explain, but the Duchess refuses to listen. She had clearly warned Margaret to keep the children away from Diego. Margaret deeply apologizes and bows to ask for forgiveness. Seeing Margaret pathetically bowing, the Duchess wants to see her grovel more. Cedric interrupts her, defending Margaret that she did nothing wrong. He lies, claiming he asked Margaret to plan the picnic because he wanted to be with Diego. The Duchess slaps Margaret, making her glasses fly to the ground. She turns to Cedric, warning him that others will pay the price for his mistakes. If Margaret isn't enough, she'll bring Cecilia in the room, leaving Cedric terrified. Hearing her made Margaret confused. What does she mean by bringing Cecilia in? Has she been hitting Cecilia whenever Cedric made a mistake? Margaret confronts the Duchess, saying she's abusing her children and calling her a coward. If the Duchess defines discipline as abusing, Margaret will not obey her orders. She has no right to become a parent. The Duchess laughs hysterically, warning her not to teach her and interrupt her while she disciplines her children. That's so true. That's straight up abuse. No child deserves a parent like the Duchess and the Duke. As governess, it's Margaret's duty to keep the children safe, but it won't be necessary anymore. The Duchess fires her and demands she leaves the manor that night. She finally understands why Cedric is protective of Cecilia and how Cecilia gets nervous around the Duchess. Why are the people in the manor so broken? As soon as the Duchess leaves, she calls Cedric over. He's in tears. She checks for any bruises and injuries, relieved that there aren't any. Then she worries about Cecilia. Cedric embraces her, telling her she's the best governess he had. She assures him she's not going anywhere. She just needs to see someone who can reverse things. Is she going to ask Diego for help? Margaret ponders on her options. Either she stops Diego from ending his father, or just let the Duke die. Anyway, her topmost priority is the children's well-being. She thinks hard about it and remembers her exchange with Cedric. The Duke had known about the Duchess's abuse, but instead of putting an end to it, he enabled it. That's enough for her to side with Diego. Like clockwork, she runs into Diego, dropping a casual comment that he'd be needing a black tie for today. Although he doesn't quite pay her any mind, she's satisfied to have given him a hint that she's on his side. After all, letting the Duke die is the only way to show him her support and worth. With renewed vigor, she becomes confident that her plan of striking a deal with Diego will go smoothly, just like how he accepted a deal from the heroine Adriana in the original novel. And that was a contractual marriage of all deals. To be honest, Margaret feels bad for messing with the novel's plot, but she has no choice. She needs to do this to save the children, and perhaps to even save Diego from suffering a lonesome future. Meanwhile, Diego mulls over Margaret's words. It's almost as if she knew what he's about to do to the Duke today. Snapping himself out of it, he pushes it to the back of his mind as he meets with a cloaked man. The man informs Diego that everything and everyone is in place. No guards stationed, and only the Duke inside the prayer room. Without another moment to waste, Diego then sets his plan in motion. On the way there, he finds himself looking back at father and son memories. Unfortunately, there isn't much warmth and happiness to recall. His father is practically like a stranger to him. The door to the prayer room creaks open as Diego enters, catching the Duke off guard. He gives Diego an earful, yelling at him to get out. But then his eyes widen at what Diego has to show him. A dagger. Apparently, it's not just any dagger. It's the same dagger Duke Bertha personally handed the assassin when he had Diego assassinated. So of course, he would remember it vividly. Looking at his eyes, the Duke sees how sure Diego is that it was him, his own father, who sent the assassin after him. He's not mistaken, though, but it's not something the Duke would ever admit to. Duke Bertha grits his teeth, internally displeased at the assassin. First, he failed to kill Diego, and he also revealed his client's identity. What a lousy assassin, he thinks. Diego inches closer and closer to the Duke, amused that he backs away constantly. When it's evident that Diego can't be stopped, he then tries to play the father card. Surely he won't end his own father, right? Well, you're about to see. Hearing all this, Diego laughs loudly, much to the Duke's dismay. The Duke's face contorts in anger as he claims he predicted all this, that he knew from the start that Diego would grow up to become a demon, a monster. Diego draws the dagger, but even in his last moments, Duke Bertha curses him unapologetically. Before long, Diego finds his mission complete, his hands stained with his father's own blood. But oddly enough, he feels no remorse. After all, being Duke Bertha's son was nothing short of hell. Soon enough, news of Duke Bertha's death shakes the manor. Even the Duchess, as vile as she is, was left grief-stricken, unable to get up for days until the Duke's funeral. Diego, on the other hand, was never really caught as the culprit. Always one step ahead, he planted a getaway guy who confessed to murdering the Duke while being drunk. With all the servants busying themselves with the funeral, Margaret finds herself attending to the children herself. A loved one's loss is never easy, but Cedric and Cecilia are harder on themselves for a different reason. They feel nothing about their father's death. I can't blame them. He was barely a father to them. Margaret gets the children ready for the Duke's burial, but Cecilia doesn't cooperate. She even slaps Margaret's hand away when she tries reaching out to her. Margaret can tell that Cecilia is upset, probably still unable to process all the emotions she's feeling. It would be cruel to push her to her limit, so she lets her stay behind and rest while she and Cedric attend the Duke's burial. As soon as they leave the room, they run into the Duchess, who looks unrecognizable. Her hair looks disheveled, her cheeks sunken. She glares at Margaret menacingly, remembering full well that she fired her already. However, she's in no state to kick her out again. She's much too affected by her husband's death to deal with Margaret herself. Heading inside the carriage, Margaret becomes determined to negotiate with Diego. She'll be sure to make a deal to save the children. During the burial ceremony, Diego delivers a eulogy for his father, but the Duchess causes a scene, painting Diego as her husband's murderer. She charges towards him, smacking him as she continues framing him. Diego, however, doesn't retaliate. How could the Duchess say such cruel things to a son grieving his father's death? Hearing this, the crowd sympathizes with Diego and they urge the guards to seize the Duchess. As she's being dragged away, the crowd erupts into whispers, talking about the succession. Some talk ill of Diego, some talk ill of Cedric. Either way, all their words pierce through Cedric's heart. Diego cuts through their chatter, reminding them all to pay their respects. There's no merit in ruining either of his sons at his burial, and there's also no merit in insulting the Duchess, the woman his father loved. He approaches Margaret and Cedric, checking up on how Cedric is faring amidst everything. Although Margaret hates to take part in his little play, she needs to make her move. With all seriousness, she holds Diego's gaze, remarking that he really did end up needing a black tie. Our girl casually dropping a big bomb hints that she knows who's the real murderer. Although caught off guard, Diego chuckles and says they ought to discuss the children before leaving. Left alone, Margaret's attention quickly shifts to a girl with silver hair and ocean blue eyes beside her. Could she be Adriana? In the novel, Adriana is the female lead who witnessed Duke Bertha's murder while she was hiding in the prayer room. However, in the present, she dashes away, leaving Margaret to wonder what Diego will do next. In Diego's office, Javier reports on Margaret's background, noting her kind nature and family history. He mentions Margaret's former engagement to the second son of Baron Erica, catching Diego's interest. Javier assures him not to worry, making Diego backtrack. Why would he even be worried? He brushes off Javier's comment and asks more about her broken engagement. When Javier asks if he's interested in Margaret, Diego dismisses it, saying she knows what he did and demands to see her. In the garden, Margaret picks apricots, hoping to lift Cecilia's spirit. Suddenly, Javier calls out. Diego wants to see her. She doesn't expect to meet with him so soon. Before guiding her to Diego's office, Javier kindly asks her not to provoke him so that no necessary sacrifices will be made. Was Duke Bertha's death a necessary sacrifice? Javier states that one has to kill to avoid being killed, then shares with her the abusive childhood that left Diego broken and emotionally empty. Margaret admits to knowing his plans, but she doesn't support his intent to kill innocent children. Exhaling, Javier agrees, giving Margaret his full support to save the children. With that sorted, he then leads her to Diego's study. Margaret walks into Diego's study, a look of sheer determination on her face. Diego, though, wastes no time in getting down to business. With a mischievous glint in his eyes, he brings up Margaret's rough background. Father, who's a gambler, depressed mother, and siblings who weigh her down. All that laid out, he then confronts her. Her tough life must be the reason why she wants to become his duchess. Margaret is dumbfounded. She's speechless at how wrong Diego is reading the situation. But since they're on the matter, she might as well just tell him straightforwardly. She doesn't want him to save her from her miserable life, but rather she asks him to spare his siblings Cedric and Cecilia. This is totally not what Diego expected, but I wonder how the rest of their conversation went. The next morning, Diego awakens to little Cecilia in his room, poking him nonstop. He tries to shoo her away and go back to sleep, but she doesn't relent. Thrashing around, she urges him to wake up already, but it's to no avail. Upset, she flops down on his bedroom floor, tears welling in her eyes. During their outdoor class, Diego had promised to grant her a wish, but now he's going back on his word. Finally, Diego rises from his bed, beckoning Cecilia to tell him what she wants. But to his dismay, she starts crying. Oh, give the man a break, Cecilia! Meanwhile, in the classroom, Cedric isn't too keen to see Margaret. He can't believe he cried so much when his mother fired her, only for her to continue being their governess. As Cedric busies himself with an activity, Margaret takes the time to reflect. It's been 10 days since the Duke's passing, and the Duchess is nowhere in sight. She's probably doing her best to stop Diego from inheriting the title. The sound of the timer snaps her out of her thoughts, informing Cedric that time's up. He pleads for an extension, but she refuses, hoping to teach him all about time management. From behind them, Diego agrees, hauling Cecilia in his arms. Margaret is caught off guard by the sight before her, but Diego could hardly care. He needs to speak with her this instant. Exhausted, he hands Cecilia to her, flopping her in her arms as he heads to the next room to wait. He's so funny. He looks so done with Cecilia. Unfortunately for Cedric, this doesn't mean he can have free time from his studies. Knowing him too well, Margaret makes sure to tell him not to run off, otherwise he'll be taking another test. In the next room, Diego ushers Margaret to a chair as soon as she arrives. A frown is plastered on his face as he begins speaking. He expresses that he had initially thought he and Margaret would make great allies, but with Cecilia managing to get past her and barge into his room, he definitely changed his mind. But given that this is the situation he's left with, he decides to draw a contract period for her duties. Speaking freely, Margaret expresses that it should be until Cecilia comes of age. Or, seeing Diego's confused face, she corrects herself. Cecilia and Cedric should stay in the manor until they come of age. But as for her time as governess, she'd leave earlier than that, and of course, she'll keep his secret without fail. Pleased, Diego agrees and moves on to telling her his own conditions. For one, he'll be moving the children to the annex. When Margaret questions his decision, a look of displeasure crosses his face. Margaret then breaks the truth. Duchess Bertha has been abusing Cedric and Cecilia. The worst part? Duke Bertha tolerated it too. Who knows what that evil Duchess will do to the children if they're sent to the annex? This comes as a shock to Diego, and for a moment, it's as if he breaks for them. Knowing this, he changes his mind about sending them to the annex. But unexpectedly, he cancels the contract altogether. He then gets on one knee, asking Margaret to marry him. To Diego's surprise, Margaret gives him a solid no for an answer. However, he is unfazed. He tells her that what he just did wasn't a proposal, it's a threat. For years, he had always found it difficult to find someone who wouldn't betray him. But Margaret, someone who's seen him at his worst and wants to protect his siblings, Diego thinks she's the most ideal match for him, albeit in a contractual marriage. Despite Diego's swoonful explanation, Margaret remains firm with her decision to reject him. Her reason? because soon enough he'll fall in love with Adriana, just like the original novel's plot. But of course, it's not like she can tell Diego all that. So she settles by telling him that he might fall in love with someone right after they become engaged. This makes him frown, almost as if he's offended by what she just said. Diego spent his whole life trying to become a better man than his father. Even if it's just a contract marriage between them, Diego promises to remain loyal to Margaret. My knees are going weak. This man has my heart. To be honest, Margaret is really tempted to accept his offer. But the thing is, she knows how the plot goes. And in the end, Diego and Adriana are bound to be together. Thinking hard, she thinks about the consequences. In the novel, the only reason Adriana proposed a contract marriage to Diego was to save herself from her intended groom, a savage and violent man. If Margaret accepts Diego's proposal, Adriana will suffer. Finally, Margaret settles on waging a bet. In 3 months, Diego will meet a beautiful girl, and if he still doesn't change his mind about their engagement even after meeting the girl, then Margaret will agree to marry him. Diego becomes confident in himself, knowing full well this would be a piece of cake for him. But since the idea is being entertained already, he decides to get to know Margaret more. And it all begins with having lunch together the following day. What he doesn't expect, though, is for Margaret to bring the children. Diego stares daggers at Margaret, appalled that she managed to escape being alone with him for lunch. Beside Margaret, Cecilia beams with joy as she shows everyone her new jewels. Apparently, getting her jewels is the wish she wanted him to grant. With a cocky grin, Diego hypes himself up to Margaret, stating that he always keeps his promises. Margaret, however, tries her best to pay him no mind. As if the world was teasing her, taking a bite of the delicious food definitely didn't help her situation. If she agrees to Diego's proposal, she'd be able to enjoy such good food every day of her life. Clearing her throat, she makes it clear that she still has no intention of accepting his proposal, something that Diego really can't understand. Ever so sly, he turns to the children and tries to get them on his side. Cecilia is thrilled about the idea of Diego marrying Margaret, but the same can't be said for Cedric. He isn't too excited about the whole thing. Pouting, he explains that he wants to marry Margaret when he grows up. Margaret is touched at how much Cedric values her. That is, until he tells them his reasons. It turns out he only wanted to marry Margaret so she could do all his schoolwork. Poor Margaret. Both brothers only want her so they can exploit her. Unfortunately for Cedric, Diego isn't letting Margaret go so easily, and the two begin fighting over her. Unwilling to back down, Cedric offers that they should move to Fernando, a country that allows polygamy. That way he can be Margaret's second husband. Still, Diego counters, making their verbal fight over Margaret more heated. It's exactly at this moment Margaret realizes just how shameless and childish Diego is. After lunch, Cedric expresses his disapproval of the engagement, but he chooses not to elaborate the reasons behind it. Shortly after, he leaves to prepare for their outdoor outing. But out of nowhere, the Duchess appears and starts harassing Margaret. She forcibly pulls Margaret's hair, leaving her to struggle under her hold. Despite her weak state, her strength doesn't falter as she shoves Margaret, throwing her onto the cold floor. Now, towering over her, the Duchess demands to know why she's siding with Diego. Margaret shakes with pain after being physically beaten up, but she's not letting the Duchess have her way. Clenching her fist, she expresses that the children have always been fond of Diego. It was just her, their own mother, who poisoned their familial relationship. Hearing this, the Duchess fumes. She's in disbelief that a mere governess would dare to talk back to her. But what gets on her nerves more is the way Margaret has the guts to even hold eye contact with her. Once more, the Duchess lashes out, grabbing her by the collar and dragging her across the hallway. She'd teach Margaret a lesson, one involving the children. Ugh, this woman is beyond redemption. Still dragging Margaret, she bangs on Cedric's door, adamant to hurt her in front of the children. Margaret thrashes around, screaming for Cedric to stay in his room. No matter what happens, he shouldn't open the door. But hearing her screams, Cecilia becomes worried and she comes out of her own room from across the hall. To her horror, she finds her mother physically harassing Margaret, making her run to Margaret's aid. Little as she is, she pleads with her mother to unhand Margaret, clawing at her hands to release her grip. This infuriates the Duchess, and without warning, she motions to kick Cecilia. Cecilia braces herself for the pain, but it never comes. Margaret made it just in time. Holding her close, she shields Cecilia with her own body, taking the hit for her. Margaret can feel her whole back throbbing with overwhelming pain. If even an adult like Margaret is hurting, how much more if Cecilia was the one who was kicked? Some mother the Duchess is! Like a madwoman, the Duchess orders the servants to take Margaret away. Unexpectedly, Diego enters the scene. He doesn't appreciate the Duchess laying hands on the love of his life, Margaret. The Duchess scoffs, visibly amused by Diego's poor taste in women. Clapping back at her, he explains that he doesn't share that trait with his father, a direct blow to the Duchess's pride. Gesturing to Margaret, she urges Diego to find a new governess for the children because she's firing her this instant. But when he refuses to let her go, the Duchess forces Cecilia to come with her, even threatening to hurt her if she refuses. But quick on her feet, Margaret leaps into action, pulling Cecilia away from the Duchess. Finally, Diego intervenes, commanding the Duchess to leave. She grits her teeth in anger, but she's in no position to disobey him, so she obliges against her will. When she leaves, both Margaret and Cecilia are finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. A while later, as Margaret treats her injuries, Diego has the audacity to tease her. Annoyed, Margaret balls up her fists. He should definitely try getting smacked too. Pleased with himself for getting on her nerves, he squats next to her as he hands her her glasses. He's confused why she insists on wearing them if she can see perfectly well. Leaning close to her, he then comments on the beautiful blue hue of her eyes, making Margaret's heart skip a beat. All jokes aside, Margaret redirects their conversation back to the children's welfare. For the children's sake, the Duchess must be kept away from them at all costs. She recalls the moments right after the incident. She had found Cedric crying inside his room. He felt guilty for staying inside while she and Cecilia were getting beat. Her thoughts are cut short when Diego speaks, wondering why she cares about the children so much. Thinking about the children, their safety and welfare, Margaret admits to feeling a sense of responsibility to protect them. This makes Diego wonder out loud. Would Margaret worry for him too if he was still a child? To his surprise, she leans close and gently cups his cheek, admitting that she does, in fact, worry for him. What a bold move, Margaret! One would think you're confessing! In the middle of caressing Diego's face, Margaret suddenly becomes aware that her gesture might be a bit too much. Yet to her surprise, it seems to offer him a deep sense of comfort. Later on, their conversation takes a sudden, more serious turn. In response to her previous question about his mother, he explains that she was a woman of remarkable strength and resilience, nothing like his stepmother. In the past, Diego's mother never showed her struggles to anyone, not even to her child, despite enduring deep humiliation. She carried herself quietly, with dignity, yet society judged her by having such harsh standards. Now that he's grown, Diego no longer believes his mother's death was simply from natural causes. On a brighter note, he's comfortable enough with Margaret to let his guard down. Apparently, at Margaret's request, the Duchess was placed under house arrest and kept away from the children. Unlike in the original story, Diego chose to isolate only the Duchess, relocating her to a separate wing. Now, because of his outrageous character, she finds herself daydreaming about him without even realizing it. At least, not until Cecilia snaps her out of it, pulling her back to reality. Wasting no time, they set off to find the young master, while the little girl excitedly exclaims how much she loves outings. It turns out the young master has been eagerly anticipating the day, already waiting for them to head out. Looking at the children's cheerful spirits, it seems like their mother's confinement has become an unexpected opportunity for a change of pace. They also seem to have grown fond of Margaret, eagerly choosing to sit beside her in the carriage. However, it seems they have been held up at the front gate for some time now. Apparently, someone mysterious is demanding to see Diego, disregarding the circumstances. Noticing the guards struggling to handle the situation, Margaret steps in to speak with the visitor herself, only to be surprised by the unexpected presence of Lady Adriana. To Lady Adriana's surprise, Margaret recognizes her. As it turns out, Margaret had seen her at the funeral and had been so struck by her beauty that she still remembers. Momentarily, her plan to sneak in to avoid being mistaken for a secret meeting is unintentionally exposed. Seeing an opportunity, Margaret decides to use the situation to prove an extraordinary beauty she hopes will capture Diego's eyes. With that, she quickly comes up with a cover story to let Adriana inside. She tells the guard she had heard a guest would be visiting the young duke and instructs him to keep it discreet. Once the guard departs, Margaret formally introduces herself as the household tutor. She figures that Adriana must be here to confirm whether the children are still alive, which is understandable, given that she witnessed the duke's murder firsthand. Apparently, Diego is away at the moment and expected to return soon, so Margaret instructs her to wait in the drawing room. But to their surprise, they shortly spot his carriage approaching. Meanwhile, upon seeing the tutor, Diego promptly steps down from the carriage, assuming she's come out to welcome him. When Margaret informs him that she and the children are heading into town, he responds by pointing out that, as their guardian, she should have asked for his permission first. Choosing to avoid an argument, she lets it go and begins explaining their plans for the day. Just then, their conversation is interrupted as the guard steps in to announce the arrival of a guest. Lady Adriana, who has been standing quietly, steps forward and formally introduces herself to the young duke. Margaret's quick excuse is impressively clever. Admittedly, Lady Adriana, the eldest daughter of Marquis Aztez, has kept a low profile in high society due to her poor health. With that, Diego invites her inside to continue the conversation in more detail. Just before she and the children depart, Diego reminds her they'll talk once she returns. His final remark lingers in her mind, haunting her over the entire ride into town. Margaret purposely comes home at sunset, timing it just right, as she hasn't encountered Diego once, even after putting the kids to sleep. As she finally steps into her room, she lets out a sigh of relief, grateful to have made it through the day safely, only to hear a man's voice echo her words suddenly. She lets out a startled squeal, only to find Diego sitting silently on her bed as if he's been waiting for her. She scolds him for entering a lady's room unannounced. In response, he reminds her that standing someone up isn't exactly polite either. Diego had expected her to come home early, especially since he had told her earlier that he wanted to talk. But in her defense, she assumed he and Lady Adriana still had unfinished business. Moreover, he admits he has several questions, starting with the true identity of Lady Adriana. Margaret then proceeds to answer all his questions, everything from her own identity to how she managed to let Adriana in. Shortly, Diego reveals that the young lady proposed to him. In addition, Lady Adriana admits that she knows he was responsible for his father's death, and if he agrees to marry her, she'll keep that secret to herself. Troubled by how much she seems to know about everything, he begins to question Margaret, suspecting she might be involved. He starts to believe the two women may have conspired together. In order not to lose his trust, Margaret reminds herself to stay composed and choose her words wisely in moments like this. With that in mind, she calmly denies any involvement. Additionally, she tells him to go through with the marriage. However, the thought of sharing a bed with someone who threatened him doesn't feel right. On top of that, he doesn't even have any real feelings for Lady Adriana. Anyway, Diego eventually decides to place his trust in Margaret. For someone like him, trust isn't given lightly, so choosing to believe in her despite his initial doubts is no small thing. Before leaving the room, he reminds her not to lie to him and insists that she must remain someone he can rely on, no matter what. But can she trust him, though? Afterwards, Viscount Beautry, Diego's maternal uncle and the younger brother of the current Marquess of Beautry, greets him while calmly seated on the couch, having waited for his return. Diego remarks that his uncle's visit is unexpected, particularly given his absence from the funeral. Viscount Beautry offers an apology, explaining that he hadn't been feeling well at the time. Apparently, the Viscount is one of the traitors Margaret had warned Diego about. According to the investigation, he had squandered his fortune through gambling, and on top of that, he's also involved in drugs. What a shame. Diego looked up to his uncle back then. Momentarily, the Viscount points out that the Duchess being locked in the annex reflects poorly on their family's reputation. He even goes on to justify her behavior, downplaying its severity by claiming such measures are sometimes necessary when it comes to raising children. For him, corporal punishment from parents is discipline, and any defiance from a child is unacceptable. Such typical boomer mindset. It is revealed that the Duchess has been repeatedly abusing the children and even resorted to violence against the governess. Diego refuses to tolerate such behavior, which is why she's now confined. Diego hopes his uncle would understand his perspective and that he simply couldn't bear to watch his younger sibling suffer. But to his disappointment, Viscount Beautry sees the children as nothing more than obstacles in his way. Not only that, but the Emperor's mistress, who is close to the Duchess, has been spreading rumors about the suspicious circumstances of the Duke's death. Whispers that have even reached the Imperial Palace. This has become one of the factors delaying Diego's succession. Fortunately, he has been made aware of these situations thanks to Margaret. Without her, he likely wouldn't have realized that his uncle may be leveraging his reputation to have the Duchess's confinement lifted. Viscount Beautry continues offering advice to his nephew, putting on a facade of concern. Though Diego doesn't believe a word of it, he still hands his uncle a chest of jewelry, knowing that he's been struggling financially. After all, he's been like a father figure to him. The next day, Margaret reflects on Adriana's tragic life. In the original story, her life was cursed, as her mother died during childbirth and her father hated her for causing it. Things worsened when Marquis Aztez had a new wife. Not long after, their father-daughter relationship became permanently damaged. Despite being the rightful heir, she was reduced to little more than a target of neglect and mistreatment. Upon reaching adulthood, Adriana faced yet another challenge, an engagement proposal from King Granton III, a monarch already married to 8 wives. After turning down the offer, she crossed paths with Diego, and that's where their love story begins. After reflecting, Margaret resolves to revisit the original story now that the two main characters have finally met. Just then, a butler arrives with an unexpected letter for her. To Margaret's surprise, the letter is from Lady Adriana, inviting her to the opera that evening. She wishes to thank her in person for helping her through a difficult situation. After she finishes reading the letter, the butler informs her that Diego is requesting her presence. Though unsure of the reason, she heads to him without further delay. It's her first time witnessing someone fire a gun, which sparks a new curiosity about him. Still, her interest doesn't run deep enough to want to hear more about it. As it turns out, she was right. The letter from Adriana reached Diego first. He then questions Margaret about her whereabouts and insists that she ask for his permission before going anywhere. Though hesitant to report every detail of her movements, she eventually reveals where they plan to meet later. If she accepts the invitation, Diego instructs that Adriana be informed that he intends to marry Margaret. He proposed to her, so he refuses to marry someone else. However, Margaret has no right to interfere in matters between him and Adriana. Besides, Adriana has every right to take control of her future, which is why she should be the one to end up with him. Wanting to avoid any further complications, Margaret reminds Diego that she intends to marry someone she truly loves. And he's not exactly her type. I doubt it. I just know she has feelings for him deep down. Admittedly, it's the first time Diego has ever been rejected by a woman. Coincidentally, it's also Margaret's first time turning down a man. Deep down, she has always secretly wished to make a handsome man cry at least once in her life. He can't believe that she never managed to turn down all the troublesome suitors from her past. Yet the only one she does reject is the Duke, the most respectable of them all. Ugh, I totally get his frustration. After being rejected, Diego leaves without much resistance. Margaret feels somewhat deflated. After all his talk of never letting her go, he ended up walking away too easily. Later that night, she finally meets with Lady Adriana. It is revealed that Adriana slipped out in secret, careful not to let anyone discover who she was meeting. The opera provided the perfect cover, crowded enough to get unnoticed. Additionally, she goes on to explain that the reason she proposed to Diego was because she's being forced into marriage with King Granton III, an abusive ruler with multiple wives. Due to her young age, her father still has the authority to decide whom she marries. That's the reason why she needs someone who can protect her. With a sense of urgency, Adriana pleads with Margaret to help her find a way to meet with the young Duke. I appreciate how she doesn't put pressure on Margaret despite her obvious desperation. Apparently, Adriana has the advantage of leveraging her status. As the daughter of a marquis, she already holds a powerful position, and her family name alone is enough to command respect and intimidate others. However, she's too righteous to do that. Moved by her desperation, Margaret offers to help her escape that unfortunate fate, even though she feels unsure about how things will unfold. She also expects nothing in return for her help. Meanwhile, Diego can't stop replaying his earlier conversation with Margaret in his mind. He's more than a little annoyed that she dismissed him as not being her type. Just as he's about to lose his composure, Cecilia suddenly appears and asks if he likes the tutor. OMG, where did she pop up from out of nowhere? Her randomness is adorable. Cecilia correctly guesses that Diego has feelings for Margaret. Despite this, he continues to deny the obvious, even though she's aware he already proposed to her. In his defense, children like her don't understand adult matters. He also tries to convince himself that his proposal was a matter of necessity, not driven by affection. Yet despite his reasoning, his thoughts betray him as he finds himself dwelling on her striking features. Oh boy, how hard is it to admit liking a girl? As Diego continues to argue with his thoughts, Cecilia nosily inserts herself into the situation. She even offers to help by improving his image in Margaret's eyes. After all, the two of them are quite close. Just when the idea piques his interest, Javier knocks on the door to inform him that a guest has arrived to see him. Without hesitation, Diego heads off to meet the guest. However, Cecilia trails right behind him, insisting they go together. He lets out a defeated sigh, eventually giving in and allowing her to tag along. Seeing the Duke with a child, the guest teases that he has turned into a babysitter and jokes about him taking lessons on how to be a good husband before even offering a proper greeting. They must be so close that formal greetings feel completely unnecessary between them. The guest continues to tease, joking about their old agreement to grow old and die alone. However, the future of the country's heir would be left hanging in the balance if that happens. Momentarily, the guest turns his attention to Cecilia, prompting Diego to introduce him as the prince of their country. She appears stunned by the revelation, especially once she gets a full look at his appearance. Crown Prince Lionel Eduardo becomes visibly irritated when Cecilia accuses him of having a prince complex, giving him yet another reason to be annoyed by children and their unfiltered honesty. Soon after, Diego gently ushers Cecilia out, explaining that the adults need to have a private conversation. Afterward, the prince congratulates Diego for finally casting his evil stepmother out into the cold, something he admits has been a lifelong wish of his. However, a new issue has emerged, this time involving Lionel's own stepmother. It's quite amusing how these best friends are dealing with the same problem. He instantly grows irritated, making it clear he refuses to acknowledge his father's mistress as his mother. As it turns out, both of their stepmothers are closely aligned, and they are the very reason Diego still hasn't received his title. Lionel's father is so blinded by his mistress that he complies with her every whim. As a result, it's fallen on the prince to clean up the mess within his own family. In exchange, Diego swears to reveal the Countess's secret, on the condition that Lionel agrees to confront her on his behalf. Once the deal is struck, it's revealed that she's been having an affair with High Priest Delmar. Additionally, he requests another favor to find out more about Lady Adriana, which is a relatively simple task. Hear me out. Prince Lionel and Lady Adriana would make such a cute couple. Speaking of Adriana, she previously asked Margaret to make an opportunity for her to speak with Diego during the royal ball scheduled to be held at the palace in a week. That's her only chance before her father introduces her to King Granton III. If she loses this one chance, she'll have no choice but to accept her fate. But Margaret is determined not to let that happen. After their conversation, she feels more determined than ever to find a way to set things right, even if she no longer knows exactly how. Diego notices Margaret stressing out, prompting him to check on her. She brushes it off, using the children's lessons as an excuse, but he doesn't seem entirely convinced. He then brings up her conversation with Adriana, but she continues to evade the truth. Playfully, he teases her with a hint of flirtation. Margaret brushes off his teasing and takes the opportunity to bring up the upcoming royal ball. Unfortunately, Diego has already made up his mind not to attend, mainly because he doesn't have a partner. She subtly tries to persuade him to attend, but he quickly catches on to her sudden interest in his social affairs. Amused, he uses it as yet another excuse to tease her, suggesting that if she admits she's interested in him, he might just change his mind about going. It takes her a moment, but she eventually swallows her pride and admits she's interested, just to ensure her plan with Adriana will go as planned. However, it becomes clear that Diego simply wanted to hear those words from her because, even after her admission, he still refuses to attend the ball. OMG, what a betrayal! I would be so pissed! Admittedly, the real reason behind his hesitation is the attention he'll attract, especially after his father's death. He insinuates that having a partner might help deflect some of that pressure. Before Margaret can respond, Diego preempts her by making it clear he has no intention of attending with Adriana. That leaves her with little choice but to become his partner herself. He then agrees without hesitation, but admits he doesn't know how to dance, implying they take dancing lessons together. And so they head to the shop for the ball that very same day. Throughout the carriage ride, Margaret complains in her mind that attending the ball is a lot of work. She'll need a proper dress and matching shoes, especially since arriving as Diego's date is bound to stir up gossip. During the carriage ride, Margaret asks to be introduced as a governess Diego has taken pity on, who's unable to debut in society due to unfortunate circumstances. This cover story will help avoid any unwanted attention or gossip. Soon after, they arrive at an elegant and one-of-a-kind clothing shop known for its exceptional service. She can't help but feel a bit anxious, as it's her first time in such a luxurious place. Diego immediately requests to prepare their finest selection so Margaret can truly shine at the royal ball. He orders everything, from the dress to the accessories, to be ready within a week. With that, the head stylist begins assessing Margaret, ensuring every detail suits her perfectly. She's also given the freedom to choose any dress she desires. Momentarily, she spots a blue necklace that catches her attention, along with a matching bracelet and ring that complete the set. The entire ensemble suits her perfectly. Noticing her reaction, Diego leans in and whispers he'll buy it for her. The gesture makes her realize that her ideal type might just be a man who spoils her with gifts. In response, he playfully suggests they should get married then. Margaret bursts into laughter, finding the comment amusing. To her surprise, he sincerely admits that he means it and that he's willing to give her everything he has. To prove his point, he goes ahead and decides to buy every dress in the boutique for her. If he wants to, he will indeed. And that's it for today, guys. What did you think? As always, don't forget to like the video and comment for the next part so we know you want more. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for updates. See you in the next one!